How are you guys doing? Today is Thursday, May 6th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Chris Paul, one of the best point guards in NBA history. Today, he does turn 36, and with this profile, I hope to, of course, include all of his stats, accolades, and accomplishments, just to kind of put it together. And I think his stats, his accolades, achievements, all that, they really speak for themselves as to why Chris Paul is a player that sits in his own league, and when he retires, he's going to be another player that holds up that's going to be sitting in a Hall of Fame in a Hall of Fame jacket when it's all said and done. If you're unfamiliar with him, he's about 6 foot tall, 175 pounds. He's relatively short for the NBA, considering the average NBA player is about 6'7", 6'8". He's incredibly intelligent. He's very smart. For the first half of his career, he was always known for being one of the fastest point guard, one of the best defenders in the NBA. He's been the president of the Players Association. He is a player that's very involved with the NBA, and his impact is very felt on and off the floor. Of course, many people are aware of what he does off the floor. But of course, just to give a little bit more of background into Chris Paul, he's originally from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is why, after being one of the best high school prospects in all of basketball in LeBron James's class, he decided he was going to go to play 2 years at Wake Forest. And of course, this was a very big thing because he was a much anticipated prospect at Wake Forest, because they don't get that many. Well, actually, they've had like Tim Duncan, but at the same time, they've been waiting for a player that was as good as Chris Paul. This was a McDonald's All-American, first team All-American in North Carolina's Mr. Basketball before he started playing college ball at a North Carolina college. In his first year in Wake Forest, this was his freshman season. He would start all 31 of the games that he played in a season where Wake Forest would finish with a 21-10 record. They would take this team all the way to the regional semifinal, which is the Sweet 16. In the season, Chris Paul would go on to average almost 15 points a game, just over 3 rebounds, just under 6 assists, and 2.7 steals per game while averaging 33 minutes. In his freshman year at Wake Forest, he was, of course, recognized as the ACC Rookie of the Year. He was third team All-ACC as a player. He would establish himself as a great enough prospect to get taken the next year, but he decided he would go back to Wake Forest for another run at it. In his sophomore year at Wake Forest, he would average about the same amount of minutes. You see his points per game increase from 14.8 to 15.3. His rebounds increased from 3.3 to 4.5. His assists per game increased from 5.9 to 6.6. His steals dropped from 2.7 to 2.4. All this while shooting 45% from the field, 47% from three, and 83% from the foul line. Of course, and following his second year at Wake Forest, he would be recognized. He would be a first team member of the All-ACC team, and he was a first team All-American. Even though Wake Forest would take this season to go all the way to, or I guess they lost in the second round. They didn't go as far as they did the previous season under Skip Prosser, but of course with Chris Paul, they were performing a lot better than they would have without him being there. He established himself as a great enough prospect to be taken with the 4th overall pick in the 2005 NBA draft by the then New Orleans Hornets. They're currently the Pelicans now. But yes, the New Orleans Hornets right then and there in 2005 decided they were going to take the Wake Forest product, who had 2 years under his belt. And Chris Paul would start in 2005-2006 in his age 20 season. And I might as well mention it that Chris Paul has started every single game that he's been in the NBA. But of course, I'll get into it just starting from the beginning. In his very first season as a rookie in New Orleans, I guess he had to play in Oklahoma City because it was either this season or the next season where they had to move to Oklahoma City because of Hurricane Katrina. But regardless, in his first season, he would start all 78 games he would play for a season where the New Orleans Hornets would finish with a 38-44 record. They had the 10th best record in the Western Conference, but in this season, Chris Paul would not make an All-Star game, but he would be named the Rookie of the Year in the NBA after averaging 16 points, 5 rebounds, 7.8 assists, and 2.2 steals. He shot 43% from the field on 12 field goal attempts per game. He shot 28% from three and then 84.7% from the free throw line. The NBA was a different time where you necessarily didn't need a three-point shot. But of course, the fact that he was doing all this in his rookie year and the New Orleans Hornets would completely miss the playoffs, he would establish himself as an all-star level player that the NBA would count on for years to come. His second year in New Orleans or in Oklahoma City would be the last year in which he would not be named an all-star for a bit. In his age 21 season, he would start all 64 games in a season where the Hornets finished with a 39-43 record. They won one more game than they did the previous season, but Chris Paul would see his minutes per game probably increase by maybe 1 as he still started every game. He saw his points increase from 16.1 to 7.3. His rebounds went down from 5.1 to 4.4, but his assists went up from 7.8 to 8.9. This is the first time in his career he'd average at least 8 assists per game, which he would do for a very, very long time. He would average 1.8 steals per game, which is a tick below what he did his previous year, but he was still one of the best. And I mean, following all this, like I said, he wouldn't necessarily make the playoffs, but the NBA would start to recognize his talents. He took 1.5 more shot per game. He saw his field goal percentage go up by a tick to 43.7. He saw his 3-point percentage increase to 35%, and he was still shooting 81% from the foul line. Following his second season, and this was his second season in the league, and that year in between, he would end up going to play for the FIBA World Championship in 2006 in Japan, where they won bronze. This is the one time he didn't compete in the Olympics for Team USA. But regardless, this would lead into his third season playing with the Hornets. This would be the first time they were playing in New Orleans after they had officially rebuilt the stadium after Hurricane Katrina. In his third season in the league, Chris Paul would start all 80 games that he would play in a season where the New Orleans Hornets would finish with the second best record in the West with a 56-26 record. Byron Scott would win the Coach of the Year this year, and Chris Paul would be named to his very first All-Star team. He would be named to the All-NBA first team as well and the All-Defensive second team for the very first time that he would do so. In this season, he would see his minutes per game increase by about a minute. He was averaging 37.6 minutes per game. He was averaging 21 points per game while he was shooting 2.5 more field goal attempts per game. And amongst that, he would see his field goal percentage tick up to 48% from the field, 39% from three, which is an increase from his second year as well. And then he shot 85% from the foul line, which were highs in all three of those categories. In his third year in the NBA, might I remind you. And this is once again his first season averaging at least 20 points per game. He saw his rebound numbers drop down a little bit to 4 rebounds a game. He would see his assist numbers jump to 11.6. This would be the first time he averaged double-digit assists in his career. This would be the first time he led the NBA in assists. He also averaged 2.7 steals, so he led the league in steals and assists in his third year in the NBA, while helping the New Orleans Hornets make it to the playoffs. Once they made it to the playoffs, they would beat the Mavericks in the first round. A very solid Mavericks team, by the way. But they would end up losing to the Spurs in a season where I think the Lakers ended up winning it all. But still, that was still a very good team that they had to face off against. And Chris Paul had shown in his third year that as a player that was selected to the All-NBA first team, he was already in the NBA's top 5, voted on by the people that vote the MVP. So of course that's a very big jump to make, and that's when I feel he made the jump into the elite conversation. But this would transition into his fourth season in the NBA, his fourth season with the Hornets. In 2008-2009, his age 23 season, he would start all 78 games for the Hornets when they finished with a 49-33 record. They had 7 less wins in the previous season, and they finished with the 7th best record in the Western Conference. In this season, Chris Paul would see his minutes increase just a little bit to 38.5, which up until now is the most minutes that he's ever averaged in a season to date, and I don't think he's ever going to average more minutes than that ever. He saw his points increase from 21.1 to 22.8. He saw his rebounds increase from 4 rebounds to 5.5 rebounds, which is the most rebounds he's ever averaged in a season in his career. He would average 11 assists per game, which is the second most assists he's ever averaged in a season in his career. And following it was a tick down from the previous season, but that would be the second and the last time he averaged at least 11 assists per game. He averaged 2.8 steals. He led the league in assists and steals for the second time, combined. He would shoot 50% from the field while shooting just as many free field goals per game as he did the previous season. So this is the first time he'd shoot 50% from the field, and thus far the only time he'd shoot 50% from the field. He would shoot 36% from 3, which is about what he shot the year before, and he shot 86% from the foul line. And not to mention, in 2009, he would be selected to the All-Defensive First Team for the first time in his career, and he would be selected to the All-NBA Second Team for the very first time in his career as well, being recognized as one of the NBA's best 10 players while keeping your minutes at about the same, while converting at a higher efficiency level. And of course, he was being named an All-Star for the second time in his first 4 years in the league. Following this season, they would end up losing in the very first round to the Nuggets, and this is in 2009, the season where the Lakers would beat the Orlando Magic to get Kobe's first championship, just for context. This would transition into Chris Paul's 5th year in the NBA in 2009-2010, his age 24 season. He would start all 45 games that he would play for the Hornets in a season where they finished with a 37-45 record. They finished with the 11th best record in the West after Chris Paul got seriously hurt. I forget exactly what the injury was, but he was out for a bit. But in the games that he played, he still averaged 38 minutes. He averaged 18.7 points, 4 rebounds, 10 assists. This would be the third season in a row he averaged double-digit assists. He averaged 2.1 steals. The fourth time in his first 5 years in the league, he averaged at least 2 steals per game. All this while shooting 49% from the field, 40.9% from 3. First time he ever shot 40% from 3 in a season in his career. And he also shot 84.7% from the foul line, as he was named an All-Star for the third time in his career up until that point. But regardless, he didn't play the full season, so he didn't get the end of the season accolades that many would expect. But after that season, he would come back a lot stronger for his very last season in New Orleans. His very last season in New Orleans, or his 6th season in New Orleans, would be 2010-2011. His age 25 season, in which he played all 80 games that he would start all 80 of the games that he would play in a season where they finished with the 7th best record in the West yet again. They won 46 games, which is 9 more than they had won the season in which he wasn't there. In that season, Chris Paul in his last season in New Orleans, he would average 15.9 points per game, 4 rebounds, 9.8 assists, which at this point were the lowest he'd ever put out in a full season with the Hornets. But he would still average 2.4 assists. He would lead the NBA in steals for the third time in his career. This would be the 4th time in which he averaged at least 9.5, or at least 9 assists per game this season. All this while shooting 46% from the field, 38% from 3, and 87% or 88% from the foul line, which are still historically amazing free throw shooting numbers. He would go on to be named an All-Star his 4th time in his 6 years in New Orleans. He would go on to be named, I guess after all this, he would be named to the All-NBA Third Team for the only time in his career that he was ever named to the All-NBA Third Team. And following this offseason, he decided he would go and play for the Los Angeles Clippers. This, I believe, was before they were able to land, or this was right after Blake Griffin had won the Rookie of the Year. So, of course, there was that opportunity to go there because he wanted to go to the Los Angeles Lakers. But David Stern, the then NBA commissioner, actually vetoed the move because, of course, he thought it would be too overpowerful of a move for the Los Angeles Lakers to make. So, after an exchange of events, the Los Angeles Clippers would be the proud recipients of Chris Paul. And his next season, Chris Paul's 7th season in the NBA, will be played in the Staples Center, but this time for the Clippers, not the Lakers. In 2011, 2012, he would start all 60 of the games that he would play in a season where the Clippers finished with a 40-26 record, in a season that was shortened due to, I believe, I think the players were on strike. I forget exactly the reason, but regardless, the Clippers finished with the fifth best record in the West after having not made the playoffs since 2006. So Chris Paul, his first season there, was able to take them to the playoffs. In the 60 games he would play, he would average 36 minutes. He would see his points increase to about 19.8 points per game. He was averaging 3.6 rebounds, 9.1 assists. This is the fifth season in a row in which he was averaging at least 9 assists per game. He was averaging 2.5 assists, which led the league in steals for the fourth time in his career. This would be the fifth time in his first, or this would be the sixth time in his first 7 seasons in which he had averaged at least 2 steals per game. And then doing all this, he was shooting 48% from the field, 37% from three, and 86% from the foul line. Once the Clippers made the playoffs, they would beat the Grizzlies in the very first round, but they would get swept by the Spurs in the second round. And this is in 2012 when the Thunder ended up losing to the Heat. But of course, this was their first season in Lob City. And following this, like I said, Chris Paul would be named an All-Star for his 5th season in a row. He would go on to be named to the All-Defensive First Team for the second time in his career. He would go on to be named to the All-NBA First Team for the second time in his career as well, as he was being recognized as, once again, one of the best 5 players in all of basketball again. There's a transition into his second season in Los Angeles, his 8th season in the NBA, his age 27 season, in which he would start all 70 of the games that he would play for the Clippers in 2012-2013, when they finished with the 4th best record in the Western Conference. With a 56-26 record, they had as many losses as they had won as they had the previous year, but they had 16 more wins. They were actually able to finish the complete season. And actually, Chris Paul, in addition to being named to his 6th straight All-Star game, he was named the All-Star MVP for 2013. In this season, he would see his minutes decrease by about 3. He would see his points per game go down from 19.8 to 16.9, while still averaging 3.7 rebounds, 9.7 assists, which is an increase from what he did the year before, where he averaged 3 minutes more. He led the league in steals for the 3rd season in a row, and for a 5th time in 6 seasons. All this while shooting 48% from the field, 32% from 3, a tick down from 3 from what he's used to. And he also shot 88% from the foul line. After all this, in 2013, he would be named to the All-NBA First Team for the 3rd time in his NBA career. He would be named to the All-NBA, or to the NBA All-Defensive Team for the 3rd time in his career as well. And of course, he led the league in steals for the 5th time in his career. This would lead the Clippers to the playoffs, where they would end up losing in the first round to the Grizzlies, and this was 2012-2013. This, I believe, was the second year in which LeBron and D. Wade and Chris Bosh had won a title together in Miami. But following his 2nd season in Los Angeles, he would come back, and he felt as though they got a lot stronger. In 2013, 2014, he would start all 62 of the games that he would play in a season where the Los Angeles Clippers would finish with the 3rd best record in the West with a 57-25 record. They had one more win than they had won the previous season. This is the season where Jamal Crawford won the 6th Man of the Year. In this season, Chris Paul would see his minutes increase to about 35 minutes per game, the last time he'd ever averaged 35 minutes per game in his NBA career. He would average 19 points, which is a tick up from what he did, which is 2 points more than he did the previous season. He was averaging 4.3 rebounds, which was around what he was doing before, a little bit better. He averaged 10.7 assists. This was the 4th season in his career in which he averaged double-digit assists. This was the 3rd time in his career in which he led the NBA in assists. He finished with 2.5 steals per game, leading the league in steals for the 4th season in a row, for the 6th time in 7 years. And this was the 8th time in his first 9 seasons in which he's averaged 2 assists per game, which is an incredibly tough feat to do. He did this while shooting 47% from the field, 37% from three, and he did this while shooting 86% from the foul line. Not to mention in 2014, he was named to the All-NBA first team for the fourth time in his career, and he has not been named to the All-NBA first team since. He was also named to the All-Defensive team for the fourth time in his career, and of course, he was named to, at this time, what would have been his seventh All-Star game. So, of course, Chris Paul was doing that as well. And once they made the playoffs, the Los Angeles Clippers would end up beating the Warriors in the first round. The very same Warriors that would come back the next year and win the title, but they would end up losing to the Oklahoma City Thunder in the conference finals. And this is the season in which the Spurs would go on to win it all, but still the Los Angeles Clippers were a very tough team. They had beat a very tough Warriors team, but this would now be the last time the Warriors had lost that early in the playoffs for a bit. And Chris Paul was one of the big reasons why the Clippers were so incredibly dominant through that stretch. Following that season, Chris Paul would come back in 2014-15 and start every single game for the Clippers in a season where they finished with the third best record in the Western Conference for the second year in a row, but they had won one less game than the previous year. They went 56-26. In this season, Chris Paul would see his numbers stay at about the same with the Clippers. He would average 19 points, just like he did the previous year, averaging 4.6 rebounds, a tick higher. He would average 10.2 assists, which would lead the NBA. He would lead the NBA in assists for the fourth time in his career. This would be the second year in a row, and this would be the second year in a row he did so while averaging double-digit assists. This is the fifth year in his career in which he averaged double-digit assists. He did all this while averaging 1.9 steals, which actually broke his 7-year record, his seven-year streak of averaging at least 2 assists per game, but 1.9 is virtually 2. He would do all this while shooting 48.5% from the field, 39.8%, 40% from three. He did this while shooting 90% from the free throw line. This is the first time in his career he had shot 90% from the free throw line. And this would be, like I said, the 8th year in a row that he would make the All-Star team. This would be the second time that he had made the All-NBA second team in his NBA career. This would be the 5th time he had made the All-Defensive first team. And this would be the last time, or the fourth time that he had led the league in assisting. He has not led the NBA in assists since 2015. Once they made the playoffs, they would end up beating the Spurs in the first round. The Spurs that won the finals the previous year. They beat the Spurs in 7, but they would end up losing to the Rockets in 7, the year where the Golden State Warriors would make their first title, where they would win their first title with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson in that team. Following this season, of course, Chris Paul would come back stronger. And in 2015-16, he would come back for what would be his 5th season with the Los Angeles Clippers in 2015-16. In his age 30 season, his 11th season in the NBA, he would start all 74 of the games that he would play in a season where the Clippers would finish with a 53-29 record. That would be the 4th best record in the West. They had 3 less wins than they had won the previous year. Also, Jamal Crawford had won his second Sixth Man of the Year award in a 3-year span with the Clippers. Also, Chris Paul would be named to what would be his 9th All-Star game, while he would keep his minutes per game. He would see his minutes per game drop by about 2 minutes. He would still average 19.5 points per game, averaging 4.2 rebounds. He averaged 10 assists, his 3rd season in a row in which he averaged double digits. This would be his second 3-year stretch in his career in which he averaged a double-digit assists for every year. He averaged 2.1 assists, which would be the 8th time in his first 10 years in which he's averaged at least 2 assists, or ninth time. That's a lot of times. At the same time, all this while shooting 46% from the field, 37% from 3, and 89.6% from the foul line. In 2016, he would go on to be named to his 2nd All-NBA second team in his career. He'll be named to his 6th All-Defensive first team as well. And once they made the playoffs, the Los Angeles Clippers would end up losing in the very first round to the Trailblazers. This is the season where LeBron and the Cavs would come from behind and beat the Warriors after trailing. And after this season, of course, they would or Kevin Durant would join the Warriors. But prior to that, I mean, the U.S. basketball team would go to the Olympics. They won in 2012 with Chris Paul. Chris Paul was not on the 2016 team. He was there for 2008 as well, but in 2016 he elected not to go, and because he would go on to prepare for his last season with the Los Angeles Clippers. In 2016-2017, in his age 31 season, Chris Paul would go on to play his 6th season in Los Angeles as he started all 61 of the games that he would play for the Clippers in a season where they finished with a 51-31 record. That would be the 4th best record in the Western Conference, as they had won 2 less games than they had won the previous season. On the season, Chris Paul would miss the All-Star game for the first time since 2007, for the first time in a decade, after making 9 consecutive. He would go on. He would see himself average 31.5 minutes per game. He saw his points drop from 19.5 to 18.1. His rebounds went up from 4.2 to 5. His assists dropped to about 9.2. He was still averaging 2 assists a game. This would be, I would imagine, the 10th time he had done so in a 12-year span. He was doing all this while shooting 48% from the field, 41% from 3, and 89% from the foul line, so maintaining elite shooting percentages. And like I said, he didn't play enough games. And following his last season in Los Angeles, they would go on to lose in the very first round to the Utah Jazz. After that year, Chris Paul would eventually leave Los Angeles, and he would join the Houston Rockets as Kevin Durant joined the Golden State Warriors, as the Rockets for the next couple of years seemed to be the one team, the best chance to knock the Golden State Warriors off their title course. So following his last season in Los Angeles, going into what is, I guess this would be his 13th season in the league, his first season with Houston. He would start all 58 of the games that he would play for Houston in a pretty injury-riddled season, I might say, in a season where the Rockets would finish with a 67-17 record. This is the year that James Harden actually won the MVP, so this is the first time, where Chris Paul had to kind of take a little bit of a backseat and allow someone else to really control the offense. But regardless, Chris Paul was still doing what he needed to get done. While averaging 31 minutes, he would average 18.6 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 7.9 assists. The least amount of assists he'd average in his career since his rookie season, I might say. And this was in 2006, which was 12 years prior to this. He would average 1.7 steals, which is the least amount of steals he'd put up in an entire season in his career. But 1.7 is still better than most NBA players have put up in their best. All this while shooting 46% from the field, 38% from 3, and 91.9% from the foul line, which is the highest free throw percentage he'd ever shoot. And his impact would, of course, show in the playoffs, as they would beat the Jazz, or they beat the Timberwolves in the first round in 5. They would go on to beat the Jazz in the semifinals in 5, which led them to face off against the Warriors. They were actually up 3-2 after Game 5 in the Western Conference Finals, but then Chris Paul got hurt. And in Game 6 and Game 7, of course, the Warriors would change the tide of everything, and they would end up winning the series, and they would eventually go on to win the championship, winning Kevin Durant his first championship. So, of course, Chris Paul was a very vital component in the Rockets making it that far in the first place. And of course, James Harden had a great MVP season, but a lot of that success can be handed, or a lot of credit can be given to to Chris Paul for his role in it all too. But following Chris Paul's closest chance to make the NBA Finals and win a championship, he would come back to Houston for a second year there, which would be his 14th year in the NBA. in his age 33 season. He would start all 58 games for a Houston Rockets team that would finish with a 53-29 record. They had won 12 less games than the year before, and they finished with the fourth best record in the Western Conference. Chris Paul, in effect, would see his minutes stay at about the same. He saw his points per game drop from 18.6 to 15.6. He was averaging 4.6 rebounds compared to 5.4. He saw his assists jump up to about 8.2. He averaged two steals yet again. This would, I think, would be the 11th time in a 14-year career. He was shooting 42% from the field, the lowest he'd ever shot from the field in his career. He shot 35% from three, which is lower than he would do on average. And he would do this while shooting 86% from the foul line. And once again, he helped the Houston Rockets make it back to the playoffs. They would end up beating the Jazz in the first round before losing in the second round to the Warriors for the second year in a row. And this was yet another year in 2019, I believe, was the year that the Warriors would go to the finals and lose to the Raptors. But yeah, that's about where... 2018, 2019. Yeah, that was the year that they would end up losing to the Raptors in the finals. But following a second season in Houston, Chris Paul was eventually traded for Russell Westbrook. Like, there was a whole trade about it to bring Russell Westbrook to Houston, and then that eventually would put Chris Paul in Oklahoma City, a place where many people thought he would be stranded and they wouldn't make the playoffs. In this season, in 2019-2020, in Chris Paul's age 34 season, his 15th season in the NBA, he would start all 70 games that he would play in a season where the Thunder would finish with a 44-28 record. They won... Well, I guess because the season was shortened because of the coronavirus, they had a better win percentage than they had won the previous year. Without Russell Westbrook, they added Chris Paul, and of course they had a lot of younger players around him. They would finish with the fifth best record in the Western Conference. In the season, Chris Paul would average about 31.5 minutes per game, as this was his age 34 season. He would see his points per game jump back up to 17.6, two more than the previous season. He would average 5 rebounds, which is about above average for what he was used to in his career. He averaged 6.7 assists, which is the lowest amount of assists that Chris Paul has ever averaged in a season in his career. He averaged 1.6 steals, which is also the lowest amount of steals he's ever averaged in a season. He would shoot 48.9% from the field, 36.5% from three, and 90% from the foul line. So, of course, his shooting percentages were where he needed to be. And after this, he would be named to his 10th All-Star game in his career after he hadn't made one since 2016. After his last year in Los Angeles and his entire stint in Houston, he would be named an All-Star in Oklahoma City. And after they made the playoffs, the Oklahoma City Thunder would eventually lose in the first round to the Rockets, to Russell Westbrook and James Harden, the team that he got traded off of. I mean, it was a pretty good storyline, and it was actually a very great... It was a pretty good playoff run for the Oklahoma City Thunder, considering many people they virtually wrote them off for the season. But regardless, Chris Paul was there. His impact was definitely felt. And in, I believe, 2020, he was named to his 4th ever All-NBA second team. That's the most recent time that he's ever been named. And following his one season in Oklahoma City, he was eventually traded to the Phoenix Suns, a team that was sitting just outside of the playoff picture right before they signed him. And Chris Paul this season, he's played all 67 of the games he started all 67 of the games that he's playing in so far for a Phoenix Suns team right now that has the second best record in the Western Conference. So, of course, he's been doing a really good job of helping them get there. Thus far, he's been named to his 11th All-Star game in his NBA career, which is a lot more than a lot of the greatest NBA players that have ever played. While averaging 31 minutes a game this season, he's averaging 16.2 points per game, which is a tick lower than what he did in OKC last year. He's averaging 4.5 rebounds. He's averaging 8.9 rebounds. He hasn't averaged 8.9 rebounds since 2017, so he's getting right back up in that aspect. He's averaging 1.4 steals per game, which is the least amount of steals he's ever averaged in a season, but he's still shooting 49% from the field, which is incredibly high for what he's doing. He's shooting 39% from three, and he's also shooting 93.1% from the foul line. He's currently leading the NBA in free throw percentage. And this is just what Chris Paul has been able to do for the entirety of his career, and he's going to help the Phoenix Suns make it into the playoffs. But as it leads to where we are right now, Chris Paul is currently a 36-year-old point guard who is continuing to hold his own amongst the best basketball players in the world. It's very tough for a player at this age to not only keep up, but to excel at his position, and Chris Paul is showing day in and day out why he's such a valuable player. With that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to all 35 minutes of this piece. I hope all is well. I want to wish Chris Paul a happy 36th birthday. Once again, today is May 6th, 2021 out here in this quarantine. I want to wish everyone a happy day. Thanks once again for listening to this piece. I hope all is well, and I will come back once all of today's exhibitions are done. I will come back with another episode tomorrow. Thanks once again. Thanks for listening to this piece, and peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow. If you ever get a chance to watch Chris Paul, he's wearing number 3 for the Phoenix Suns, so check out CP3, also known as the Point God. Peace.